I was having a massage at the time, and I didn't even actually notice anything. But the man who was doing the massage said, "I'm worried about you. I want to call an ambulance." And he did. And I said, "That's so silly." Tim Curry, recalling the stroke that changed everything. There are actors who become stars. There are stars who become legends. And then, once in a generation, perhaps less, there is someone who becomes something that language struggles to contain. Tim Curry was that third thing. For more than 50 years, Timothy James Curry inhabited characters that no other living actor could have played. He made horror seductive in 1975 as Dr. Frank-N-Furter, the glittering, gender-bending heart of the Rocky Horror Picture Show. He made horror genuinely terrifying in 1990 as Pennywise the Dancing Clown, a performance so complete, so committed, that it lodged itself permanently in the nightmares of an entire generation. He was the scheming Cardinal Richelieu, the irrepressible Wadsworth in Clue, the magnificent Long John Silver alongside the Muppets, the ancient flame-breathing villain Hexus in Fern Gully, a voice so commanding it turned an animated tree into a monument of menace. He held a Tony Award, a Daytime Emmy, a Grammy. He received an Olivier nomination. He worked in film, in theater, in television, and in voice acting. Not sequentially, not in chapters, but all at once, across 5 decades, refusing every definition the industry tried to place on him. But behind that extraordinary legacy lies a story not simply triumphant, but devastating, and ultimately, quietly heroic. Because the final chapter of Tim Curry's life was written not on a stage, not on a screen, but in a wheelchair, 14 years after a stroke robbed him of the ability to walk. He continued. He showed up to fan conventions. He lent his voice to animation. He signed on for a memoir. He never, not once, let the chair define what he was. And then, on the night of Tuesday, August 25th, 2026, emergency services were called to his home in Los Angeles at 23:23. By the morning of Wednesday, August 26th, the world had learned that Tim Curry, 80 years old, was gone. What kind of man does it take to survive 50 years of unclassifiable genius and spend the final 14 of them still working from a chair, still finding new ways to give everything he had left? If Tim Curry has ever made you feel something a stage or a screen had no right to make you feel, hit like as tribute to one of the most singular artists who ever lived, it is fitting that the story of a man who was never what anyone expected him to be begins not in Hollywood, not in New York, but in the quiet of the English countryside, where a boy who would one day terrify and delight the entire world was still learning, against every odd, what he was made of. Timothy James Curry was born on the 19th of April, 1946, in Grappenhall, Cheshire, a quiet village in the northwest of England where the pace of life was measured not in ambition, but in seasons. His father, James Curry, was a Royal Navy chaplain, a man of discipline and calling whose work took him away from home with the regularity of tides. His mother, Patricia, was a school secretary, steady, present, practical. The emotional anchor of a household built around a father who was, by the nature of his vocation, perpetually elsewhere. It is a particular kind of childhood, growing up in the shadow of an absent parent, whose absence carries authority rather than indifference. James Curry was not a cold man. He was a devoted one. But devotion to God and crown has a way of leaving its own kind of silence in a home. And it was into that silence that young Timothy began to fill the room, with voices, with performance, with the particular electricity of a child who has discovered that becoming someone else is not escape, but revelation. He was educated at Kingswood School in Bath, a Methodist institution with deep ties to the Navy's chaplaincy tradition, the kind of school that shaped its students through discipline, through expectation, through the quiet pressure of institutional excellence. It was there that Curry first encountered drama not as hobby, but as vocation, not as an extracurricular, but as the only thing that made complete sense. The school stage gave him something the classroom could not: the sensation of truth delivered through fiction. He was not yet 20. He already understood things about performance that most actors spend entire careers reaching for. From Kingswood, he went to the University of Birmingham, where he read English and drama, a pairing that was not accidental. The literary discipline sharpened his instinct for text. The dramatic training gave him the technical vocabulary to execute what the instinct demanded. By the time he graduated, he was not a young man looking for an opportunity. He was a young man who already knew what he was, and who understood, with a clarity unusual in someone so new to the world, that the question was not whether he would find the stage, but which stage would be large enough to contain him. He moved to London. He worked the West End circuit with the hunger specific to those who have not yet had their moment, but are certain, bone certain, that the moment is coming. He took small parts. He studied the craft in the only laboratory that matters: live performance in front of real audiences, night after night, failure and revelation alternating in equal measure. The moment, when it arrived, did not knock politely. It detonated. In 1973, a relatively unknown composer and actor named Richard O'Brien was writing a musical unlike anything the West End had ever seen. It was campy, and it was subversive. It was science fiction, and it was horror. It was a love letter to B-movies and a demolition of every respectable theatrical convention simultaneously. O'Brien called it the Rocky Horror Show, and from the very first draft, there was only one role that mattered, and only one man O'Brien believed could play it: Dr. Frank-N-Furter, a self-described sweet transvestite from transsexual Transylvania, a creation of such extravagant, deliberate excess that the wrong actor would make him ridiculous in the worst possible way, campy without depth, provocative without intelligence, loud without presence. The role required someone who could walk onto a stage in fishnet stockings and a corset and command absolute silence. Someone who could make an audience laugh and make them uncomfortable and make them feel genuinely, inexplicably moved. Sometimes within the same verse of the same song. Richard O'Brien chose Timothy James Curry. He was 27 years old. What followed at the Royal Court Theatre in June of 1973 was not simply a successful opening night. It was the birth of a cultural phenomenon and the simultaneous emergence of one of the most distinctive theatrical presences the British stage had ever produced. Curry did not play Frank-N-Furter. He inhabited him. He made a character written as an alien libertine into something that felt impossibly human, achingly, specifically human. There was loneliness in Frank-N-Furter beneath the sequins. There was hunger. There was the specific sadness of a creature who has built an entire world around pleasure, because sincerity feels too dangerous to survive. Audiences felt it. Critics felt it. The show transferred. It ran and ran and ran. Then came America and the film. In 1975, director Jim Sharman brought the stage production to the screen as the Rocky Horror Picture Show. Curry reprised the role of Frank-N-Furter for a budget that bore no relation to his talent and a production that bore every mark of its own glorious limitation. The film was released to reviews ranging from indifferent to dismissive. It vanished from wide release within weeks. And then something happened that no studio executive predicted and no critic anticipated. The film found its audience not in theaters, but in midnight screenings, in basements and revival houses and campus auditoriums. In the dark, among people who had not yet found a community that would accept them, who stumbled into a cinema at midnight and discovered a man in a corset telling them, with every shimmy and every held note, that being exactly who you are is not a flaw to be corrected, but a power to be wielded. The Rocky Horror Picture Show became one of the longest-running theatrical releases in the history of American cinema. It is still screened today, 51 years after its release, in midnight shows across the country, with audiences dressed as their favorite characters, shouting call and response lines they have memorized from childhood. By any measurement, it is one of the most culturally durable films ever made. And at the center of every frame that matters stands Tim Curry. Not performing, not acting in any conventional sense, but channeling something so specific and so complete that the performance has never aged by a single day. He later reflected on what Frank-N-Furter meant to him with the characteristic precision that defined every interview he ever gave. Not effusively, not with the performative gratitude of someone reciting a rehearsed answer, but honestly, carefully. The way a craftsman talks about the work that first told him what he was capable of. The role did not make Tim Curry a star in the conventional sense. Hollywood did not come calling with franchise offers and leading man contracts. What it gave him was something rarer and more permanent, a reputation for doing the thing that nobody else could do. And from that reputation, he built a career that remains, to this day, genuinely without parallel. There is a particular kind of actor that Hollywood has never quite known what to do with. Not because the talent is in question, the talent is never in question, but because the talent refuses to be filed. It will not sit in the drawer marked leading man. It will not stay in the drawer marked character actor. It moves between genres with the ease of someone who has never accepted that genres are walls rather than suggestions. It takes roles that should not coexist in a single filmography and makes each one feel like the only logical choice for the person playing it. Tim Curry was that actor. And in the 37 years between the Rocky Horror Picture Show and the stroke that changed everything, he built a body of work so varied, so deliberately unclassifiable, that film historians still struggle to summarize it without resorting to lists. So here is the list, because the list is the argument. 1982. Annie. Curry plays Rooster Hannigan, the scheming, tap-dancing villain of the beloved family musical, with a physicality and a comic precision that makes the role his own while never breaking the film's warm register. He is 36 years old. He has never done anything like this before. He is completely convincing. 1985. Legend. Ridley Scott's dark fantasy, a film of genuine visual ambition, casts Curry as darkness, the embodiment of evil itself. He is buried under 4 hours of prosthetic makeup per day. The horns alone are a feat of physical endurance, and yet what Curry delivers beneath all of it is not a performance obscured by costume, but a performance amplified by it. A voice so low and so deliberate that it seems to come from somewhere beneath the floor of the earth. The film is not a box office triumph. The performance is not in question. Also, 1985. Clue. Based on the board game of the same name and treated by its studio as a disposable experiment, Clue is a screwball murder mystery that lives and dies on the manic energy of its ensemble. Curry plays Wadsworth the butler, the role that requires him to be simultaneously the straightest man in the room and the most electric presence in every scene he occupies. He delivers. The film, like Rocky Horror before it, found its true audience not on its opening weekend, but in the years that followed. A midnight cult classic that television and home video transformed into a permanent fixture of American popular culture. 1992. Ferngully, The Last Rainforest, an animated environmental film aimed at children, featuring a villain named Hexus, a spirit of pollution and industrial destruction who is, in the hands of Tim Curry's voice, one of the most genuinely menacing presences in the history of American animation. Hexus sings. Of course he does. Curry performs the song Toxic Love with a commitment so total, a register so simultaneously seductive and revolting, that parents sitting beside their children in cinemas reportedly felt genuine unease. He is voice acting. He has no costume, no makeup, no camera to perform for. There is only a microphone and 50 years of accumulated craft, and it is enough to make a cartoon tree feel like a genuine threat. 1990. IT. There are performances that define a genre. There are performances that define a generation. And then there is Tim Curry as Pennywise the Dancing Clown in the television adaptation of Stephen King's It, a performance that did something that horror, as a genre, almost never manages to do. It did not simply frighten its audience. It stayed. It lodged itself in the subconscious of every person who watched it at an age when the subconscious is still soft enough to take a permanent impression. Children who watched it in 1990 are adults in their 40s and 50s now, and the image of Pennywise, of those yellow eyes and that particular smile and that voice promising that they all float down here, has not faded by a single frame. What Curry understood about Pennywise, what separated his interpretation from every subsequent iteration the character has received, was that the clown is not simply a monster. The clown is the specific shape that your fear takes when fear wants to be invited in. Pennywise does not hunt. He seduces. He makes children lean toward him even as every instinct tells them to run. That requires an actor who can project warmth and dread simultaneously, who can make a smile feel like a warning, and a warning feel like a welcome. Curry managed it. He managed it on a television budget with practical makeup and limited visual effects, in a production that had every reason to settle for serviceable horror. He did not settle. He delivered something unrepeatable. 1993. The Three Musketeers. Cardinal Richelieu. Calculating, elegant, magnificently villainous. Played with the precise restraint of a man who knows that the most dangerous power is the kind that never raises its voice. 1996. Muppet Treasure Island. Long John Silver. And here, uniquely, Curry is asked to play a villain alongside felt puppets and rubber chickens, to pitch his performance to a frequency that can coexist with Kermit the Frog and still feel entirely real. He does it. He does it with such genuine investment that Long John Silver in this film is both funny and genuinely threatening. A combination that should be impossible and that Curry makes feel effortless. The voice work continued in parallel with the screen work and eventually outlasted it. He voiced characters in video games, most notably Gabriel Knight, Sins of the Fathers, a point-and-click adventure game from 1993 that became a cult landmark of the medium. He voiced villains in animated series. He provided narration. He recorded audiobooks. His voice, that instrument of such unusual architecture, simultaneously British and theatrical and warm and dangerous, became a career of its own, running alongside the screen career like a second river following the same mountain. Awards came. a Tony Award for his stage work, a Daytime Emmy, a Grammy, an Olivier nomination, each one from a different medium, each one for a different kind of work. The breadth of the recognition was itself the statement. This was not an actor who had found his lane. This was an actor who had rejected the concept of lanes entirely. In 50 years of working, Tim Curry never repeated a formula. He never found a type and exploited it. He never made the rational career calculation that most actors make, the one that says, "This worked, so do it again, slightly differently, until the audience stops coming." He treated every role as a first principle, as a problem to be solved from scratch, as an opportunity to discover what a human being looks like from the inside of a character no one has ever inhabited before. And then, in 2012, everything changed, which raises the question that the second half of Tim Curry's life demands we ask. What does it mean to be an artist when the instrument you have spent 50 years perfecting is suddenly, irrevocably, partially taken from you? What do you do next? And how do you do it with grace? It happened without warning, without drama, without the cinematic gravity that a life as theatrical as Tim Curry's might have seemed to demand. He was in Los Angeles. He was having a massage. And somewhere in the ordinary quiet of that afternoon, no stage, no camera, no audience, something shifted inside him in a way that could not be undone. The man performing the massage noticed it first. A change in Curry's color, perhaps. A stillness that was not relaxation. Something in the quality of his breathing or the texture of his presence that triggered an instinct impossible to articulate, but impossible to ignore. He told Curry he was worried. He said he wanted to call an ambulance. And Tim Curry, because he was Tim Curry, because he had spent 50 years being the most composed person in any room he occupied, told him that was so silly. The ambulance came anyway, and it was the decision that saved his life. Tim Curry had suffered a major stroke. He was 66 years old. The damage was significant, not to his mind, not to the particular intelligence and precision and wit that had animated 50 years of work, but to his body, to the left side of it, to the mechanism of walking, of standing, of moving through the world with the physical authority that had always been inseparable from his presence on a stage or a screen. He underwent brain surgery. The recovery was long and honest and unglamorous in the way that real recovery always is. Nothing like the montage sequences that Hollywood uses to compress suffering into something digestible. Real recovery is slow and repetitive, and defined not by breakthroughs, but by the accumulation of small, grinding increments. Curry did it. He did it without public complaint. He did it without the performance of suffering that celebrity culture often demands from its public figures in exchange for continued sympathy. When he eventually spoke about the stroke, in the careful, measured way he spoke about everything that mattered, he did not reach for melodrama. He reached for precision. He said with characteristic directness that he still could not walk, that the chair was very limiting, that he would not be singing and would not be dancing very soon, and that he still had real problems with his left leg. Not X, but Y, the same construction the man had used his entire life to deliver truth. Not self-pity, not performance, just the honest coordinates of where he stood. Except that he did not stand. He sat in a wheelchair from 2012 onward for 14 years until the night of August 25th, 2026. What he did from that chair is the part of the story that deserves to be told not as aftermath, but as its own chapter of achievement. He continued to work, not as a gesture of defiance, Tim Curry was never the type to perform resilience for an audience, but because work was what he was, and a wheelchair did not change what he was. Voice acting had always run parallel to his screen career. Now it became the primary current. He lent that extraordinary instrument, unchanged by the stroke, still carrying every register from menace to warmth, still capable of more emotional range in a single sentence than most actors achieve in a scene. To animated series, to video games, to projects that required nothing from him except the thing he had always done best. He gave the voice. The voice gave everything. He appeared at fan conventions. And this, perhaps, is the detail that speaks most clearly to the character of the man. Fan conventions are not prestigious engagements. They do not carry the cultural weight of a film premiere or a stage opening. They are crowded and logistically complicated, and they require a level of sustained public presence that would exhaust a healthy person, let alone someone managing the specific demands of life in a wheelchair. Tim Curry went. He went because the people who had loved his work for decades were there, and because he understood, with the particular intelligence of someone who had spent 50 years thinking carefully about what art is for, that the relationship between a performer and an audience does not end when the performance does. He made a cameo in the horror film stream in 2024, 2 years before his death, at 78 years old, still showing up, still finding a way to be present in the work. In 2016, he participated in the Rocky Horror Picture Show, Let's Do the Time Warp Again, the television remake produced by Fox. He did not play Frank-N-Furter. That role, this time, belonged to Laverne Cox. Curry played the criminologist, the narrator figure, the one who frames the story and holds the memory of everything that came before. There is something almost unbearably fitting about that casting. The man who created the original, sitting now at the edge of his own mythology, presiding over a new generation's encounter with the world he built 50 years earlier. Not diminished by the chair, not reduced by the passage of time, simply present, authoritative, himself. And then there was the memoir. He was writing a book. He had titled it Vagabond, a word that carries in it the particular freedom of someone who has never belonged to one place or one category or one definition of what a life is supposed to look like. The memoir was announced with a planned release date of October 2025. It would have been, by every reasonable expectation, one of the most remarkable books ever written by a working actor. 50 years of stories, 50 years of characters, 50 years of a perspective so singular that no biography written by someone else could have substituted for it. The book was not finished. Or, if it was finished, it has not yet been released. What remains is the title, Vagabond, and what it suggests about how Tim Curry understood his own life. Not as a career, not as a filmography, as a journey without fixed destination undertaken by someone who trusted that the next role, the next stage, the next character waiting in the dark of the wings would be worth the step toward it. On the night of August 25th, 2026, emergency services were called to his home in Los Angeles at 23:23. The response was swift. The outcome was not in their hands. By the morning of Wednesday, August 26th, his manager had confirmed what the world was not ready to hear. Tim Curry was gone. He was 80 years old. The cause of death was not disclosed. No foul play was suspected. The industry that had spent 50 years failing to categorize him fell silent. And in that silence, in the particular quality of the quiet that follows the loss of something genuinely irreplaceable, the full weight of what had been in the room all along became, finally, undeniable. There is a word that the entertainment industry reaches for automatically when someone of Tim Curry's stature dies. The word is legend. It is used so frequently, applied so indiscriminately to so many people who were talented and successful and beloved, but who were also ultimately replaceable, that it has lost most of its precision. It has become a kind of courtesy title, a way of saying, "This person mattered," without having to explain why or how or in what specific and irreducible way the world is different for their having been in it. Tim Curry was a legend, but the word requires unpacking in his case, because the reason he was a legend is not the reason most legends are legends. He was not a legend because he was the biggest. He never commanded the fees of the top-tier Hollywood stars of his era. He was not a legend because he was the most decorated. His awards, though genuine and hard-won, do not form the kind of trophy case that dominates industry conversations. He was not a legend because he conquered one genre so completely that the genre bears his imprint. He worked in too many genres for any single one to claim him. He was a legend because he was unrepeatable. Because in 50 years of working across film, theater, television, voice acting, musical performance, and every hybrid space between them, he produced a body of work that could only have been produced by exactly him. Not a version of him. Not an actor in his tradition. Him. Timothy James Curry, born in Grappenhall, Cheshire, on the 19th of April, 1946, son of a Navy chaplain and a school secretary, educated in Bath and Birmingham, shaped by the West End, and detonated on the world by a corset and a pair of fishnet stockings in the summer of 1973. Think about what that filmography contains. Frank-N-Furter and Pennywise and Darkness and Wadsworth and Cardinal Richelieu and Long John Silver and Hexus and Rooster Hannigan. And those are only the roles that casual observers can name. Behind them lie 50 years of theater, of voice work, of television appearances, of audiobook recordings, of video game performances that a generation of gamers grew up alongside without always knowing whose voice was shaping their experience of a story. The breadth of it is not incidental. The breadth of it is the argument. The breadth of it is the proof. And then there are the 14 years in the wheelchair. It would be easy, it would be tempting, and perhaps even forgivable to frame those 14 years as the diminishment of Tim Curry, as the sad coda to a brilliant career, as the part of the story where the extraordinary man becomes, through no fault of his own, less extraordinary. That framing would be wrong. Not wrong as a matter of sentiment, but wrong as a matter of fact. In 14 years of mobility that was genuinely, significantly limited. In 14 years of navigating a world that was not built for him, of managing the specific daily weight of a body that would no longer do what a lifetime of physical performance had trained it to do. Tim Curry worked. He showed up at fan conventions where people who had loved him for decades could see that he was still there, still present, still the man who had given them Frank-N-Furter and Pennywise and Wadsworth. He lent his voice to new projects. He made a film cameo at 78. He sat in front of cameras and gave interviews with the same precision and the same dry wit and the same refusal to perform suffering that had defined every public appearance of his life. He wrote, or was writing, a memoir he titled Vagabond. None of that is diminishment. All of that is Tim Curry, continuing to be exactly what he had always been, using whatever the day gave him to give something back. He never discussed his private life in interviews, not in 50 years, not once. He drew a line between the work and the self, and he held it with a consistency that was, in an era of relentless celebrity oversharing, almost revolutionary. We know his characters with extraordinary intimacy. We know his craft with precision and admiration. We know his voice the way we know the voices of people we have loved. Immediately, completely, across any distance of time. And the man himself, the private Timothy James Curry, the person who existed when the camera was off and the stage was dark and the microphone was cold, that person remained by his own choice and his own design. His own. That privacy should be honored now. The cause of his death is not known publicly. It will not be speculated upon here. What is known is enough. What is known is everything that matters. He was born in a quiet village in Cheshire. He was educated by Methodists and by Shakespeare. He arrived in London with talent and hunger and a refusal to be ordinary. He walked onto a stage in 1973 and changed what British theatre thought was possible. He walked onto a film set in 1975 and created something that is still, 51 years later, being celebrated at midnight screenings by people dressed in his image. He spent the better part of a decade terrifying an entire generation from behind a clown's smile. He made a cartoon tree feel like the end of the world. He sat in a cardinal's robes and made villainy feel like intelligence. He sat in a wheelchair for 14 years and kept working. And on the night of August the 25th, 2026, at 23:23, in a house in Los Angeles, quietly, without announcement, in the ordinary dark of an ordinary Tuesday night, Timothy James Curry left. He was 80 years old. He had done, by any honest measure, more than enough. He had done, by every honest measure, far more than that. Leave a tribute in the comments below for Tim Curry, one of the most singular artists who ever walked onto a stage or sat beside one and gave everything he had left to give. What does it mean when someone like Tim Curry, someone who spent a lifetime refusing to be defined, is suddenly, irrevocably, gone? What does that absence tell us about what presence really costs? Think about that, and if this tribute gave you something today, subscribe to Golden Fame News. Because this is what we do here. We remember the ones who mattered. We take the time to say it properly. We do not let the legends pass in silence. Tim Curry did not pass in silence. He passed after 80 years of the loudest, most original, most gloriously unclassifiable noise any single performer has ever made. That was always the point.